The tension in the courtroom was already thick. Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, stood at the defense table, his legal team flanking him. The cameras weren't rolling. This was one of those moments that wouldn't make the nightly news in full detail. But what happened inside that courtroom would send shockwaves across the country. Trump had been dealing with relentless legal battles for years. This one, in particular, had been dragging on for months. Every day, the media spun their own version of events, twisting facts, omitting key details, and making it seem like he was fighting a losing battle. But anyone who had followed Trump's career knew that he was never one to back down, especially when he believed he was being wronged. The judge presiding over the case had already made headlines for his controversial remarks in previous hearings. Many saw him as openly biased, taking subtle jabs at Trump while maintaining a thin veil of judicial impartiality. But today, that veil was about to shatter. It started with a smirk. The judge, seated high above the courtroom, glanced down at Trump with an expression that to most seemed unprofessional for a man of the robe. Then, in a tone dripping with condescension, he spoke. "Mr. Trump," the judge said, adjusting his glasses, "it appears that you struggle with the concept of legal accountability. Perhaps if you spent less time rallying your supporters and more time understanding the law, you wouldn't find yourself in this position." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the opposing legal team appeared slightly taken aback. The comment was unnecessary, personal. It wasn't just a ruling, it was a taunt. Trump's jaw tightened. His expression, once composed, now flashed with controlled fury. His lawyer, sitting to his right, subtly tapped the table as if signaling him to hold back. But Trump wasn't one to ignore a direct insult, especially not when it came from someone in a position of power abusing their authority. Slowly, he leaned forward. "Excuse me?" His voice was calm but sharp, carrying the weight of restrained anger. The judge didn't stop. In fact, he seemed emboldened by Trump's reaction. "You see, Mr. Trump, this courtroom is not a campaign rally. There are no cheering crowds here to validate your fantasies. Here, facts matter. And the fact is, your consistent attempts to evade accountability are, well, frankly, embarrassing." The room went silent. Trump's attorney inhaled sharply, but it was too late. Trump stood up, his chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. "Embarrassing?" His voice rose, filling every inch of the courtroom. His signature defiance, the same fire that had driven his political career, was now unleashed in full force. "You want to talk about embarrassment? The only thing embarrassing in this room is the fact that you're sitting up there pretending to be impartial." Gasps erupted from the gallery. The court clerk's hand hovered nervously over the microphone, unsure whether to call for order. Even the bailiffs looked uncertain. Trump's voice carried on, growing sharper with every word. "You sit there, hiding behind that bench, acting like this is about the law. But we all know it's not. This is political. This is about silencing me. This is about stopping the American people from having a voice. And you know it." The judge's face, once smug, now twitched with barely concealed irritation. He banged his gavel once, then twice. "Mr. Trump, you will sit down, or I will hold you in contempt." Trump didn't budge. He pointed a finger at the judge. "Contempt? The only contempt in this room is the one you have for me, for my supporters, for every single person who dares to think differently than you. You don't care about the law, you care about power, and that's why this entire case is a sham." The gavel struck again. "Order," the judge bellowed, his voice shaking with frustration. But Trump wasn't finished. He turned slightly, addressing the room. "This isn't just about me. This is about every American who's been lied to, every person who's been pushed aside by a corrupt system that picks and chooses who gets justice. You don't want justice, you want obedience. Well, I'm not giving it to you." The judge's face darkened. "Mr. Trump, this is your last warning." Trump crossed his arms. "Or what?" A long silence followed. No one spoke. No one moved. It was a battle of wills, and Trump was winning. The judge, realizing the weight of what had just transpired, cleared his throat. He glanced at the court reporter as if making sure this was all being recorded. Then, in a voice much quieter than before, he said, "Let's proceed." Trump sat back down, but the damage was done. The judge had tried to humiliate him, but instead he had exposed himself, and everyone in that room knew it. The media tried to spin the story that evening. Headlines blared, "Trump loses his temper in court. Former president erupts," in angry tirade. But the footage told a different story. Millions watched the clip online, unedited, unfiltered. They saw a man who refused to be bullied, who called out corruption when he saw it. And just like that, what was meant to be a moment of humiliation became a moment of defiance, a moment of truth, a moment that no one, especially not that judge, would ever forget. The fallout from the courtroom clash was immediate. Within hours, news networks scrambled to frame the narrative, each one spinning the events in their own way. Liberal media outlets painted Trump as unhinged, dangerous, and out of control. Legal analysts debated whether his outburst could lead to further legal consequences. Some speculated that the judge might file an official complaint or even push for sanctions. But something else was happening. While corporate media worked overtime to vilify him, social media told a different story. The raw, unedited footage of the exchange had gone viral within minutes. Millions of Americans watched as Trump, with unwavering conviction, stood up to a system that many believed had been weaponized against him. Twitter, or as Trump still called it, X, exploded with support. Hashtags like "Trump was right," "Dar's biased judge," and "Dar's stand with Trump" trended worldwide. Even people who hadn't voted for him in the past began questioning the fairness of the trial. Conservative commentators, independent journalists, and legal experts dissected the judge's words. They pointed out how no defendant, especially a former president, should be subjected to personal attacks in a courtroom. Many argued that the judge had overstepped his role, turning the trial into a political battleground rather than a place for impartial justice. Even some moderates who had remained on the fence about Trump admitted that the moment was unsettling. If a former president could be treated this way, what did it say about the integrity of the justice system as a whole? At Mar-a-Lago, the reaction was electric. Trump's inner circle gathered around a massive screen, watching the news coverage unfold. Some were concerned. After all, a courtroom outburst could have unforeseen legal repercussions, but Trump himself was unfazed. "Did you see his face?" Trump asked, leaning back in his chair with a grin. "He thought he had me. He thought I was going to sit there and take it." His advisors exchanged glances. Jason Miller, one of his longtime communications strategists, nodded. The base is fired up. They're calling it a defining moment, but the media is already trying to spin it as a meltdown. Trump scoffed. "Let them. The American people know the truth." Meanwhile, the judge, now fully aware of the national firestorm his comments had ignited, found himself in an uncomfortable position. Behind closed doors, he met with a group of legal advisors and court officials. They were blunt. "Your Honor, the clip has gone viral. Legal scholars are questioning your impartiality. Some are even calling for a mistrial." The judge scowled. "Mistrial? Absolutely not. I won't let him turn this into a circus." But the pressure continued to mount. Calls flooded into the courthouse. Some were from outraged citizens demanding accountability. Others were from higher-ups in the legal system, warning that his behavior was being scrutinized at the highest levels. Days passed, but the controversy refused to die down. Trump, never one to let an opportunity go to waste, took full advantage of the moment. He addressed the nation directly through a video posted to Truth Social. "Folks, you all saw what happened," he said, seated in his signature golden chair at Mar-a-Lago. "We are witnessing the most corrupt legal witch hunt in American history. They don't want justice. They want control. But let me tell you something. They picked the wrong guy to mess with." His words struck a nerve. Donations to his legal defense fund surged. His rallies saw record-breaking attendance, with supporters holding up signs that read, "We stand with Trump," and a whistleblower from within the legal system stepped forward, claiming that there had been discussions among certain political figures about ensuring a guilty verdict before the trial had even started. The leak sent shockwaves through Washington. Politicians on both sides of the aisle were forced to address the claims. Some dismissed them as conspiracy theories. Others, however, hesitated. They had seen too many coincidences, too many irregularities in the way Trump was being treated. The wrong judge, now under intense scrutiny, was left with a difficult choice: double down or step aside. Behind the scenes, he held a private meeting with key judicial officials. "This is spiraling out of control," one of them said. "You might need to recuse yourself." The judge's face turned red with frustration. "I won't give him the satisfaction." But it wasn't about satisfaction anymore. It was about optics. Public confidence in the case had been shattered. Legal experts openly debated whether the trial could continue with such obvious bias exposed. And then, the moment no one expected, Trump's legal team filed a motion for the judge's removal, citing undeniable prejudice. The courtroom was packed as arguments were heard. Trump sat with his arms crossed, a look of quiet confidence on his face. His lead attorney stood before the bench, delivering a blistering case. "Your Honor, this is not just about Donald J. Trump. This is about the integrity of the American legal system. Every defendant, regardless of status, deserves a fair trial." The comments made by this judge have demonstrated an undeniable bias. He has lost the ability to preside over this case impartially. The judge remained stone-faced, but he knew the walls were closing in. The pressure was too great. The evidence of bias was undeniable. And then, after a long silence, the ruling came down. With a heavy sigh, the judge finally spoke. "This court acknowledges that, due to recent events, public trust in these proceedings has been compromised. In the interest of justice, I will be recusing myself from this case." The courtroom erupted. Trump leaned back, a victorious smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He had done it. He had turned the tables on a system that had tried to silence him. As he walked out of the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Trump, do you feel vindicated?" He paused, looked directly into the cameras and smirked. "I feel like the truth always wins." And with that, he walked away, leaving behind yet another moment that would go down in history. The aftermath of the judge's recusal sent shockwaves across the political and legal landscape. For Trump's supporters, it was nothing short of a victory. Proof that the system, though deeply flawed, could still be challenged. For his opponents, it was a devastating blow, a stark reminder that no matter how much they tried to bury him, Trump was always one step ahead. The media, unable to ignore the monumental shift, scrambled to control the damage. Networks that had spent weeks painting Trump as a desperate defendant now shifted their narrative. Some claimed the judge had been forced out due to threats from Trump's base, while others insisted it was a calculated move to delay the inevitable. But the reality was far simpler. The judge had overplayed his hand, and in doing so, he had exposed the very bias Trump had been warning about for years. At Mar-a-Lago, the mood was celebratory. Advisors, friends, and key figures from Trump's inner circle gathered to discuss what had just unfolded. Stephen Miller, always the strategist, leaned forward in his chair. "This was huge. The narrative has completely shifted. You weren't the one on trial today, the system was." Trump, sipping on a Diet Coke, nodded. I told them from day one. They don't come after me because of anything I did. They come after me because they can't control me." His son, Don Jr., chimed in. "The people saw it. No editing, no spin, just the truth. And they hate that." But while Trump's team celebrated behind closed doors, his opponents were in full-blown crisis mode. In Washington, key political figures, legal analysts, and media executives held emergency meetings. They had underestimated him. Again. This Was supposed to be a slam dunk, one strategist said, pacing the room. Now the entire case looks compromised. An anchor from a major network sighed. We can still spin it. Make it about delays, about how he's trying to evade justice. But people saw the footage, another interjected. They saw the judge taunting him. That's not how a fair trial is supposed to work. Panic set in. This wasn't just about one case anymore. This was about perception, about the growing belief that the system was rigged against Trump. And once that belief took hold, it was nearly impossible to undo. Meanwhile, Trump wasted no time capitalizing on the moment. He scheduled a rally within days, knowing that the energy from the courtroom clash would drive his base into a frenzy. The venue was packed. Supporters waved signs that read, "Stop the witch hunt" and "America First." The crowd roared as Trump took the stage, basking in the chants of "USA, USA!" When the noise finally settled, he leaned into the microphone with a smirk. Well, folks, looks like we had a little excitement in court the other day. The crowd erupted in no raw laughter and cheers. He continued, "They thought they could intimidate us. They thought they could silence us. But guess what? We're still here, and we're stronger than ever." The applause was deafening. He then shifted his tone, getting serious. "This isn't just about me. It's about you. It's about every hardworking American who's been told to sit down, shut up, and accept whatever the elites decide. Well, I have news for them. We're not accepting it anymore." Thunderous cheers echoed throughout the arena. Meanwhile, the legal battle continued, but with the judge gone, a new dynamic took hold. The replacement judge, knowing the national attention on the case, treaded carefully. Every decision was scrutinized, every ruling dissected. The attempt to railroad Trump had been exposed, and now they had to at least pretend to be fair. For Trump, this was yet another example of his long-standing battle against what he called the deep state. The case wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And as he walked off the rally stage, shaking hands and waving to the roaring crowd, one thing was clear. This was far from the end. In fact, it was just the beginning. As the rally ended, Trump walked backstage, flanked by his advisors. The energy in the air was electric. It was moments like these that reminded him why he fought so hard, why he never backed down, even when the entire establishment was against him. Jason Miller approached him with a phone in hand. "Mr. President, you need to see this." Trump took the phone and looked at the screen. Social media was on fire. Clips from his speech had already gone viral, with millions of views within hours, but that wasn't the most shocking part. New leaks had emerged, emails and internal memos from within the court system. They revealed discussions about how to handle Trump's case, with certain officials openly strategizing on how to weaken his defense. Some of the messages were even more damning, suggesting that pressure had come from higher up, possibly from political figures with a vested interest in seeing him convicted. Trump smirked. "You see, they can't help themselves. They always get caught." Stephen Miller shook his head in disbelief. "This changes everything. If we push this hard enough, we might expose an even bigger conspiracy." Trump turned to his team. "Get our lawyers on this. I want every single one of those emails investigated, and tell the media they have two choices: report the truth or get exposed for covering it up." Over the next few days, the scandal exploded. Conservative news outlets dissected the leaked messages, proving what Trump had been saying all along. The legal system was being used as a political weapon. Even some mainstream media figures, hesitant at first, couldn't ignore the evidence. The pressure on the prosecution mounted. Calls for an independent investigation grew louder. Legal experts debated whether the case should even proceed, given the now undeniable bias. Meanwhile, Trump took the fight directly to the people. In a fiery new video posted to Truth Social, he laid out the truth. "They tried to rig a trial against me. They tried to silence me. But guess what? They failed. And now the American people are seeing exactly how deep the corruption runs." His message resonated. Across the country, Americans, Republicans, Independents, even some Democrats, began questioning everything. If they could do this to a former president, what could they do to the average citizen? In Washington, panic set in. Key figures involved in the case suddenly distanced themselves. Some legal officials resigned. The judge who had recused himself disappeared from the public eye. Something bigger was unraveling, and those who had orchestrated the attack on Trump were scrambling to cover their tracks. Then came the final blow. A whistleblower, a former DOJ official, stepped forward, revealing that the trial had been influenced from the very beginning. In a bombshell interview, he admitted that key political figures had pressured the legal system to ensure Trump was found guilty, regardless of the evidence. The country was stunned. Within hours, congressional leaders called for hearings. The case against Trump, once seen as a guaranteed win for his opponents, was now falling apart. And Trump? He stood taller than ever. At a new rally, he addressed the scandal head-on. They tried to stop us. They tried to cheat. But the American people, you, saw through it. And now, we take our country back. The crowd erupted into chants of, "Trump! Trump! Trump!" As he waved to his supporters, he knew the battle wasn't over. There would be more fights, more attempts to take him down. But he also knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for America.